Alright guys, and welcome back here to the Dev Realm, and today we're gonna be talking about network. How can you play your game with multiplayer? Specifically, I'm not gonna go through how can you create a lobby, how can you create multiplayer stuff, but what I'm gonna go through here is how about the concept of a multiplayer game. So if you're trying to create a multiplayer game, or if you have that in mind, I'm just gonna explain you the basics, like how can you spawn stuff on the server and how can you delete stuff on the server. So it's going to be a very basic tutorial just to get you up to speed with the concept of replicating your game. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I see you in the video. Alright guys, so let's start it here. Basically, Unreal Engine has this cool feature by default that you can prototype your games as if you're playing in multiplayer. So the way you do this is that you go to these three dots in there, and you see numbers of players. So if I put 2, press play. Right now, nothing gonna happen. I'm not gonna be able to see my other player. Let me just resize this to a decent size. Because they are not playing on the network. So the way you do this is just you go here again, and you need to make sure that you change your net mode from single player to listen as a server, right? And then when you press play, one of those is going to be the server and one of those is going to be the player. So in this case here, you can see that I have the client, and in here I have the server. Right, so for this tutorial, we're gonna go deep a little bit. We're gonna create a player controller, all right? So the reason why we're creating a player controller is because player controllers, they trigger things both on server and on client. For those who doesn't know, basically a server is something where you would save your data, or you would handle things like matchmaking or counts and things like that, and the client will be where you display that data. Okay, that's the difference between a client and a server, if you don't know this. Right, so to do this, what we're gonna do here is we gonna first go to window. I want to search for something called word settings. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave my word settings in here, and if you check in that, I have a game mode, and the game mode here that comes with the Unreal Engine here, if I open up this, it doesn't have a player controller. It does, but it's just the default player controller, right? There's not much thing we can do with this, but we can create a children class that we can use to implement our logic. In this case, we can create spawn this cube in the game and unspawn in the server, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to blueprints, and I'm going to create a player controller. Okay, I'm going to call this BP, just call demo player controller. Okay, I'm going to copy this, I'm going to save everything, and now I'm going to open up that. I also going to open up the third person game mode here, alright? And where you have the player controller class, I am going to select the player, the BP demo player controller, and I'm just gonna paste it in here. All right, and that's all you gotta do for this at the moment. You don't need to do anything else. Right, so right now we have access to the player controller. So if you check in here, is we can do a print. When I press play, one is gonna say hello on the server, the other one is gonna say hello on the client and on the server, right? So let's get this done. So right now we kind of need a reference to the player, so actually the player needs a reference to the controller. So when you press some kind of a key, you want to spawn things, and you want to spawn where's the player location, things like this. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up my player. Okay, and well, this is you can do this in many ways, but what I like to do here, I like to get the player, I want my player to send a reference to the controller. So then the controller will have the reference of the palm, which is the player, and we'll have the reference of the controller as well. Right. So what I'm going to do here is on the begin play, I am going to call a node here called get controller. Right. So what we're going to do here is I am going to call a function called cast to BP demo controller. Once again, You could totally fine using an interface to do this. That will be actually quite will be a better way of doing this. But just for this tutorial, I'm gonna create as a cast, because just to make things easy. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to create classes, and that's not the purpose of the tutorial, right? So now that I have access to my controller, what I can do here is I can store that controller as a reference. So player controller reference, okay? And because now I'm just gonna make sure it's public, and now because I have access to that player controller, what I can do here is I'm gonna create a variable inside the player controller, and I'm gonna call player palm ref, okay? And in here we're gonna just call the BP third person, sorry, BP third person controller. There we go, third person character. Okay, and it's gonna be object reference. Okay, make sure it's public, and there you go. There's many ways you can actually do this. There's also another way that you could do this, which is very nice as well. Is just by on the controller, you right click and then you get palm, get player palm. Sorry, get palm. Let's check if it does return. Get controller palm, right? And then you could do something like cast to BP third person character, and there you go. You would have the access to that in the same way. But because we try to make stuff just with performance or whatever, we're already doing a cast on the character here. So what we can do here is just we're gonna get actually set player palm reference, and we gonna send ourselves as a reference, just self, okay? And then now the controller knows that this has the reference, right? Cool. So what we can do now is that once what I want to do here is when I press a certain key, it will spawn a cube both on the server and on the client. And I'm gonna do first on the client only, and then I'm gonna do on the server only, and then you see what I mean, right? So I'm gonna use here just the key events again. Let me just delete the one I used for the save system example. So when I press actually V, I'm gonna spawn a cube, all right? So let's check if I have any cube here. We do have a test cube. So if you guys, let's create one here just for this tutorial. So let's create another one let's create actor. Let's call BP test cube spawn, right? Cool. Nice. Let's open up this. Let's add a cube here. And there we go. Cool. Let's check another material. Let's get just so it is something that stands out a little bit. Right. There's one important thing here that you got to do here. Right. So when you create a new actor that you want to replicate on the server, because not everything needs to be replicated, you want to make sure that you go to details and you search for replicate, and then you tick replicate movement, replicates here, and I think that's okay. I don't think you need to tick anything else. Sometimes you do also have to tick on the children objects in here as well. Sometimes, not most of the time. So it depends how much complicated parts those they have. Sometimes just the parent is fine, but sometimes you do this. But I always do those just so I make sure 100% sure that they work on network, right? So let's spawn those objects right now. So what I'm gonna do here is on the player controller, I'm gonna create a method that, an event that will spawn that for me, right? So I'm gonna create a custom event, and I am gonna call spawn cube, and I'm gonna put a dash, and first I'm gonna spawn on the client, right? Okay, so now I'm gonna create input here, which is gonna be the transform, right? Actually, it's going to be the location now. Location, where I want to spawn the cube. And in here, I'm going to just use a vector. And then from here we already know. So we're gonna spawn actor from class. We're gonna search for the BP cube. Where is it? Test cube spawn. There you go. Cool, nice. Now if you notice that we have a problem here, that spawn the transform is not gonna work, but Unreal Engine already does this for us, which is great. Cool. Now I need to call this method, this function, sorry, this event from my character, okay? So right now, how do we do this? We just get a controller reference. We call this method, the event, sorry, and we just plug it in there once the player press. And now we need to tell where do we want to spawn. In this case, you're just gonna get self. We're gonna get actor location. And I am gonna plug this here. Right, let's see if that works. Compile and save, let's give this a go. And let's see if everything works. So press play. So right now, if you notice in here, I'm gonna press V. Do you see that the other character here can't see those cubes, right? They can see that I'm moving, but they can't see that I am actually interacting with those cubes. But if I come in here and I press V, everyone can see that they are spawned. The reason why this is happening is because the server, which is in this case the big window here, always have the authority to spawn those kind of stuff. And this is where it gets confusing sometimes, especially if you create a very complex game. But okay, how do you fix this? When this happens, when you're spawning things, it also depends, when it goes to multiplayer, it depends a lot of variables, it depends a lot of stuff what you're doing. But the basic logic that you need to keep track is, if you try to spawn an actor, you need to make sure that that thing runs on a multicast, and it needs to be called from the server. And if you try to interact with a widget, which we're not, it needs to run from the client, okay? So what we're doing here is, in order to make sure that both clients can see what's going on, right? What we're gonna do here is very simple. I'm gonna unplug everything here. If you don't know how to unplug this, you just hold Alt on your keyboard and then you press in there, okay? And then I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm gonna just rename this, and I'm gonna call here multicast, right? And the first variable, in the first event, I'm gonna call server, right? So what we're gonna do here is something very basic. We're gonna basically say, server, can you do this for me? And then the server is gonna say, yeah, sure. And then the server is gonna pass to the multicast, which will replicate to all the clients, okay? Right, there's a couple of things that you have to set up here. So first of all, when you click in the first one here, make sure this runs on the server and is reliable. Reliable means that it needs to be run on the server, otherwise it won't work, okay? And then the next one that you want to do here is that you click on the children there, you go to replicate, click on the multicast, and you press this arrow there, okay? And this will make sure that runs both on the client. Just to give you a little bit of a context, this is the same as if you do something like this, okay? Let's say you have event 01 and then event 02. You don't need to do this. This is just so I can give you an example. So you could do something like runs on the server and then runs on the client, and then in the master, in the parent one, you call event 01, you know, event 02, and then they will run on their own client and stuff. So when you use a multicast, you basically say, okay, run both on server and on client. So let's do this, right? So let's now, from the server, we're gonna call the multicast. We're just gonna pass the variable over. Come in there. Just gonna plug it in here, here, and now if I compile and save, when the client press save, sorry, when the client's interacting here, so let me just press V. As you can see, both the client and the server, they can see what's going on, right? So press V, 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 and the same here. if you go back in there. I know that it's a little bit buggy at the moment, but yeah, as you guys can see, the replication works with no problem. So once again, guys, thank you very much for watching. This lesson is very useful, especially if you're building some kind of a multiplayer game. This gives you some heads up about how to use it. Once again, this is very basic. There's more stuff to cover, but this is just an introduction. I'm sure in the future, as our series progresses, we're gonna create more complicated stuff for sure. So see you guys in the next one.